This is a special edition from 2 News.
This gentleman breaks into this lady's home. He knows her. He beats her, brutally beats her, bites her. Then he slits her throat 4 times with a 13-inch knife. Then he uses that knife to sexually mutilate her. And this is a sentence defendant has earned. If there was ever a capital case in this state, this is it.
Welcome to our KUTV special report. It is 11:40 p.m. on a Wednesday night. We are here for the execution of Taberon Honie. We are at the Utah State Correctional Facility, have been here for hours today, and now just minutes away from when that execution is scheduled. I'm Heidi Hatch with Brian Schnee.
Great to be with you tonight because this is kind of a culmination of a process. And I say that because we've been out here a number of hours learning about the steps as we make our way through the remainder of the evening into the early morning hours. The execution of Taberon Honie is scheduled for 12:01 tomorrow, so roughly 20-ish minutes from right now. The last execution in Utah was actually carried out back in June of 2010 when Ronnie Lee Gardner was shot by a firing squad.
And for the next hour or so, we will have live team coverage leading up to that execution and waiting from the word from the execution chamber that his death is over. Right now, we have Mark Cabell live at 7800 West and 700 North, about a mile and a half from where we are here at the state prison, where protesters have gathered tonight. Amanda Gilbert, who has witnessed an execution herself, is inside the headquarters here, and we'll have more on what we've been hearing throughout the day in those final hours that have been happening. Also, back in the studio, Lincoln Graves and Jamie McGriff with defense attorney Sky Lazaro and former Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff.
Let's begin our coverage with Jim Spiewak tonight. Jim is a witness to Honie's execution. Right now, he's heading to the staging area to be a witness for what's set to take place in about 20 minutes.
Well, the time is almost here for the state's first execution in 14 years. In just a few minutes, Department of Corrections staff will take me back past the next line of security to the execution room, where I will be a witness to this execution. And we found out a little bit more information of what is expected to happen. So after an IV line is established, the curtain will be drawn open, where the witnesses will then be able to see how the rest of this plays out. The command to execute will then be given, the drugs will be administered, and medical staff will keep an eye on the EKG until there is no more heartbeat and he will be pronounced dead. That is when the curtain will then be drawn, and Department of Corrections has granted a final request for a small spiritual ceremony to take place with family there in the execution room after Honie is pronounced dead. It's only expected to last a few minutes, and then the medical examiner will take over. We also found out a little bit more information about the executioner. We found out that this person is an MD and will not be in the execution room. The IV lines will go through a hole in the wall into a separate room where the executioner will be administering the drugs. So as a witness, we will not see the executioner in person in the execution room. So again, the time is almost here. In just a few minutes, Department of Corrections staff will be taking me through this next line of security to the execution room.
So once the execution is carried out, Jim and one of our photographers, Mike Stephen, will actually go back to that execution chamber, if you will, and they will be there for quite some time. Then they will come back to a media staging area for a final press conference, to which we'll be able to ask Jim, a number of folks from Department of Corrections, and other witnesses about their experience.
Outside the prison, where we have been reporting all day long, security's been tight. There was about 3 or 4 checkpoints as we were heading in that you had to show your driver's license. You also had to have your media credentials. And for that reason, that meant that they couldn't have protesters on the grounds. Once we were in here, we were not allowed to leave. And that's where Mark Cabell is. He's where the protesters and that free speech zone is. We want to go live to him right now and see what the scene's looking like there.
Hey guys, out here right now, they just had a prayer service that just finished up. They had several pastors and priests. It's an ecumenical service. Now they're giving individual people a chance to talk. They just sang Amazing Grace, and people behind me here are able to get up and give some thoughts about what they're thinking about right now as the hour gets closer to the execution. Now, most of these people behind me are against the death penalty. We've talked to a lot of them. They have a lot of varied reasons for it. We did talk to some people, though, that are pro-death penalty, pro-capital punishment. I talked to one man. His name is Walter Beach from Wisconsin. He actually lives here now, but he lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wisconsin, one of 13 states that does not have a death penalty. He says the death penalty is a deterrent. He says he thinks Honie is going to get what he deserves today. The majority of the people here are against the death penalty. You have a little bit of a different take.
A little bit. From what I hear of the situation, the guy did a really heinous act. And I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just a little north of Chicago, Illinois, and we don't believe in the death penalty there. I mean, like, there's none of that there. Here there is. And home of Jeffrey Dahmer and others, Gacy, there was no death penalty. What I'm hearing, what this man did is egregious, really bad, and the death penalty isn't a punishment. It's kind of a release. Like he shouldn't be here, not even in prison, not even serving his time out, his life. None of that. He should go. I think that what he's done and what he's done to the innocent people, the children, anyone else, that he shouldn't be here. And he shouldn't be allowed to soak up taxpayers' money. I have a different perspective on it, a different view on it, and it's just how I feel, man. He shouldn't be here.
Well, I appreciate you at least giving us that side of the argument tonight, because you're outnumbered.
I know I am, and I just happen to be here. Like, his death penalty isn't a punishment, man. He should go. He should want to go. He shouldn't want to be here. What he did was wrong, and he shouldn't be here anymore.
Okay, give me your name again. All right, that was Walter Beach. Again, he moved here from Wisconsin, where they do not have the death penalty, and he says that this was an egregious crime. He said it was very violent. He said he's been watching the coverage, and he looked into it all, and he said that he's here because he thinks that the death penalty is warranted in Honie's case. Again, back out here live, we do have people giving personal testimonies about what they're thinking and feeling out here tonight, and that's what's happening as the clock continues to tick down towards the execution time of Taberon Honie. Guys, we're going to send it back to you. We'll keep an eye on things out here. If you need to come back to us, we'll be here for you.
Hey, Mark, if you hang tight for just a second, I had a question. We are on the prison property. You're about 1.5 miles from us. And if someone didn't apply for those credentials to be here tonight, media and journalists had to be where you are. Are there any national or world outlets that are there? I remember the last execution that happened in Utah, that was firing squad, so it was different. More attention on the state. Is there any national media covering this here tonight?
Yeah, there's several national media covering it tonight. Mostly print media that's national. They've been here all day along with us. Also, Heidi, they had something interesting here. They had a live look-in where you could actually go online and take part in a vigil from all around the country, and people could chime in during that vigil. We had a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, who sang a song. We had some other people that gave testimonials and talked about doing away with the death penalty all across the United States. So that was really interesting to see people actually on their laptops watching this vigil that was coming in nationwide, and people even here could actually chime in on that vigil. So, and yeah, there are some national print people, and there's a few national television people here as well covering this. This is a pretty big story, and there's people here, as we mentioned, the one man was from Milwaukee, another man is from Canton, Ohio. He's here, and we're going to hear from him a little bit later. He's here because he had a family member on death row in Ohio who actually had his sentence commuted because new evidence had come in the case. Now, he's still in jail, but they did commute his death sentence. So we're going to be talking to him a little bit later on in the show, and you'll hear some of what he thinks about the death penalty. Guys, back to you.
All right, Mark, we'll be checking back in with you. Interestingly enough, there was also an execution in Texas today. They lead the nation in the number of executions that happen here in Utah, certainly more rare. This will be our 8th since 1976. Now, just last week, as you watched this process play out, Honie's lawyers were in court over a lawsuit trying to stop his death, one of their last-ditch efforts. They claimed the execution was unclear and also inconsistent.
A judge granted the request from the state to dismiss this lawsuit. Our Amanda Gilbert was actually in the courtroom. She joins us now and recaps what it was all about. Amanda's been following the process here and what's taken place over the last few weeks.
Yeah, guys, I was at the Matheson courthouse last Tuesday in the morning, and again, that was kind of described as Honie's attorney's last-ditch effort to stop or delay this, and he argued that the execution protocol laid out has been inconsistent. He said it needed to be better updated to avoid a botched execution, and he did talk to media after court. Then I took what he had to say to the Department of Corrections.
The Department of Corrections intends to carry out an execution without accurate or coherent written protocols.
This narrative of our procedure being carelessly put together and even reckless is just flat out false. And we really appreciate Judge Jones pointing out in her ruling that not only are we not violating the rights of Mr. Honie, but we have been more accommodating to the defense than we need to be.
And as you just heard, the judge did side with the state. Obviously, the execution moved forward. You just heard from Glenn Mills. He is with the Department of Corrections. He's been giving those hourly updates throughout the night tonight. Amanda Gilbert, KUTV 2 News.
All right, Amanda, before you go anywhere, those hourly updates, and you followed this case, anything stand out to you from some of those updates that were shared?
Yeah, something really big that stood out to me in almost all of the updates that we heard. Honie spent much of his last day with family, visiting with them, sitting on the ground, talking to them. At one point, even delaying time with attorneys to spend more time with them. And I know as far as his last meal, that gets a lot of attention. He requested a milkshake, fries, hamburger, but he wants it to be known that his last meal was with family on campus. Back to you.
All right, Amanda, thank you. I think the word you heard there from Glenn Mills was accommodating. They said they've been more accommodating. They have to be. We heard tonight that even after he dies tonight, the family is going to be allowed to go in there and do some kind of Native American spiritual ritual after he dies there in that death chamber.
And they've granted a number of his requests, too, from what he's asked over the last week or so. We are now about 7 or 8 minutes away from the scheduled execution of Taberon Honie.
Right now, we want to go back into the studio where Lincoln Graves and Jamie McGriff are joined by former Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff, who was the Attorney General at the time of the last execution, also Defense Attorney Sky Lazaro.
All right, Heidi and Brian, thank you so much for that. And once again, we want to thank you both for joining us this evening. Starting with former Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff, from your previous experience, what would the Attorney General be doing right now?
If it's still the same as it was 14 years ago, the warden responsible for the execution will not talk to anybody except the Attorney General. There's a phone, and he can only use that to talk to the Attorney General. So when the 1205, I think at that time was the death warrant said, because my attorneys were there to see if there was any last second Supreme Court stays. And so when that clock hits that, comes to me, I pick up the phone and call the warden, and I did in Ronnie Lee Gardner case, and said, you're now authorized to go ahead with the execution.
Sky Lazaro, I want to turn to you. You're a criminal defense attorney, so you're coming at this from that perspective. What's going through your mind as we're awaiting this just minutes from now?
You know, largely what those attorneys are going through and what he's going through. You know, all of his attorneys have spent years, you know, the last 25 years trying to save his life, and now we're minutes away from him being executed. So I can't imagine what that's like being his defense attorney. You spend a lot of time with these people. As you defend them, you get to know them, you get to know their families. You are there to counsel their families, you know, after the fact. It's a lot to deal with. So that's...
And a lot of years of waiting for this to happen and fighting to try to prevent this from happening. As far as the next steps after that moment, what will happen?
So, and I will tell you, it's a little haunting right now, because even though it was my legal duty to do what I did, and I do support the death penalty, I did in that case because I was familiar with it, attended commutation hearings, talked to Ronnie Lee Gardner several times. It was a hard thing to do. It was very emotional for me to give that order, knowing that within a few minutes he was executed by a firing squad. And so I actually got in trouble that night because I was a Twitter user, and it wasn't politicians didn't use Twitter at the time, and I just tweeted before I went out to the cameras in the boardroom to announce the same thing, and I said I'd just given the order to execute Ronnie Lee Gardner. Pray for the family. May God have mercy on his soul. And I had hundreds and hundreds of complaints. That's not the right use of Twitter, kind of thing.
But did you have complaints from people based on the decision that was made?
No, I did not. I mean, it's I guess still to this day, the death penalty is supported by a majority of Utahns. I still support it, but I don't support the way it's delayed here in Utah. We're the worst state as far as how long an offender is on death row, by far. Kentucky's the next closest with 27. The sixth there now average 32 years, and we just really need to fix that appellate process. You can give them all their rights and all their appeals, but there's a better way to do it.
Sky, we were talking earlier. Mark says he supports the death penalty. You indicated you don't, but you have some of the same sort of the viewpoint of this?
Yeah, I've been a defense attorney my entire career. I've always been opposed to the death penalty. When it came up in 20 and 21, I worked on the efforts to have it changed here in Utah. But that is it. I have a laundry list of issues with it and why I oppose it. But I share Mark's view on that. I think, we're executing someone 25 years after the fact. He was 22 at the time and drug addicted and, was using substances and alcohol and had all these things going on. Now we're 25 years down the road. He's been incarcerated this entire time. He's not the same. We're not killing the same person, that committed the crime at the time. And I certainly don't support taking away an appellate process either. I think the better option is life without parole. If someone's going to serve 25 years before we ultimately, put them to death, life without parole seems like a reasonable option.
Well, of course, we thank you both for your points, and we'll be checking back in with you both, defense attorney Sky Lazaro and former Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff.
Thank you.
And we're going to turn our attention now to Heidi and Brian Schnee, who are both live out in the field to share more with us from that standpoint.
All right, Jamie, thank you. While the wheels of justice have turned slowly getting to this point, as we've been listening today, they're trying to make sure that this process goes smoothly. The execution's supposed to start at 12:01. They've had about 7 what they call dress rehearsals leading up to this. So hopefully when they get to that exact moment, everything goes as planned.
You mentioned the wheels of justice turning slowly. The crime was committed about 25 years ago, and about 25 years ago was also the last time we had a lethal injection death sentence carried out here in Utah, and that was Joseph Parsons. That was back in October of 1999, which was right around the time that Taberon Honie was actually convicted of this crime. So a lot of things to process from what Mark and Sky just said there, and shared about how times have changed, and Taberon Honie likely has also changed over the course of the last couple of decades.
And while he's likely changed, if you listen to the family members and even his own daughter, she did not plead for his life to be saved. She did testify, said that she has appreciated having this relationship with her father. But there were children at this crime scene when it happened, a very brutal, awful crime that were witnessed. It's torn this family apart, and it's been a rough 25 years.
And we haven't gone into great detail, and we're not going to tonight, but about what this crime scene really was described as. And just a lot of media members out here covering this from various outlets are recounting what they remember in terms of covering the earlier days of this case.
Violent and brutal.
Violent and absolutely brutal, of course, sexual assault and murder. And it's one of those that at this point, it has been a lot of time, but as we've heard from folks that have physically spoken in front of the Board of Pardons and Parole, they are not healed in any way.
Yeah, so those family members will be witnessing from both sides tonight. It is now 11:59 p.m., 2 minutes away from when that execution is set to begin. We want to go back out to Mark Cabell, who's about 1.5 miles from the state prison where all of those protesters have shown up tonight.
Yeah, Heidi, right now they're actually taking a phone call from a rabbi who's doing a prayer right now, singing a prayer for the group. You can see the group listening to it right now. Charles Keith just spoke to this group. He's from Canton, Ohio. He just got done speaking. This is his 76th protest at an execution. He got into all this because he had a family member back in Ohio who was on death row. They found some new evidence in the case. His sentence was commuted. He's still in jail, but he does not think the death penalty works. He says that it's his personal wish to abolish the death penalty across the United States, and that's what most of these people feel. This is what he told us today when he arrived here at his 76th protest of an execution here in Utah.
We weren't around during the time of Jesus, but we've all read about it. We go to church and we feel bad, and it's a story that we embed into our children. Thou shalt not kill. And then as adults, we come out here and kill people who kill people to show them that killing is wrong. And I'm having a problem with that. I had a brother in Ohio that was convicted of a crime. He was on death row for 16 years, and then they took him off death row based on an innocent claim and gave him life without parole. And though we've continued our investigation, we found enough information and evidence to put it on the governor's desk, and now we have a pardon sitting on the governor's desk on a man that could have been executed.
Charles, do you think with the new technology in DNA, where we can go back and test these old cases, evidence from old cases, do you think that's changed a lot of people's feelings about the death penalty? Because there's some people that have been convicted and put in prison, and their DNA was never found at the scene.
Absolutely. Well, one thing about it is I'm finding across the United States that most of these guys are making claims of innocence because there is no DNA. There is absolutely nothing that you can say, hey, this guy definitively did that. No fingerprints, no footprints, no nothing. It's just a narrative. And I always tell people, if I can change the narrative as a citizen, then that's not an ironclad case. But if you've got the evidence, I can't argue against evidence. But most of the cases I've seen have not had the evidence that they needed.
Are you local, Charles?
No, I'm from Canton, Ohio. I'm an abolitionist. I work for Death Penalty Action. I'm the Impacted Communities Liaison. I usually talk to families and people that don't understand how the death penalty works and how all this comes together and what our rights are as citizens.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to us, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you.
Guys, we're back here live. We're back here live outside as the rabbi sings. It appears if everything's on schedule that the execution of Taberon Honie has probably already begun. Brian and Heidi, back to you.
Mark, thank you. You're right. It is 12:02 and would be 1 minute after the execution was scheduled to be carried out. What we will know is we will learn that the sentence has been carried out, and if that is the case, it'll likely be within maybe that 20 to 30 minute time frame from now.
That's right. The early drug cocktail that they planned on using, which was the ketamine and the fentanyl, they believe was going to work very quickly. Oftentimes they say it takes 12 to 15 minutes for this to happen, but because they're using the pentobarbital, which they didn't plan on, they said that will actually take longer. It could take up to 20 minutes before he's declared dead.
To which we also learned tonight there were 3 doses of that on hand in case the first dose did not take. It's one of those that they were preparing for, to have those backup doses. We do not know what is happening inside there right now, other than everything appears to be on schedule as it is now 12:03 here on Thursday morning, August 9th, and one of those that we've been waiting for this moment because of our coverage leading up to this. But as we learn more about what takes place here, we'll be sure to bring it to you right away.
As we were talking to Glenn Mills, the spokesperson for the State Department of Corrections earlier, he said that in the minutes leading up to this, that Taberon Honie, if he was being compliant, would be able to walk of his own free will into that death chamber. And from everything we've heard so far today, it seemed like that was going to be the case. If something happened otherwise, they would have to restrain him and then move him in otherwise. But it sounds like he probably walked in there minutes ago, was strapped to that table before this began.
But was also going to be given the opportunity to speak tonight as well. And that sounded like something that maybe he was going to take advantage of. He was made aware that if anything kind of went off the rails, they would cut that microphone right away. So we'll be interested to talk to our Jim Spiewak here, who was the execution witness from KUTV 2 News, when he is out shortly after all of this takes place, to get his perspective of what took place right around the 12 o'clock hour here, as we are now at 12:04 a.m. on this Thursday.
I don't think most people, when they go to work for the day, think that they're going to go watch someone die. But in our profession, this is something we do, and witnessing this happen is part of the job. Amanda Gilbert has actually witnessed an execution herself. She's joining us right now to talk about what could be playing out right now and what's happening in the prison behind us.
You know, I think we talked a lot tonight about the procedure, exactly what happens when, but the biggest thing I remember from witnessing is just those final moments of the condemned. I know when I witnessed, he actually gave a thumbs up to his attorney. This was in Oklahoma. It was kind of his last moments, his final words. Those are really the things that stick out to you, because it kind of reminds you that this is a person. Where I'm standing right now, this is where we are expected to hear when the sentence has been carried out. One more thing I want to mention, you know, we've been getting hourly updates where I'm standing throughout the night. In the last update, we kind of learned about Honie's final moments. We were told that he said his final goodbyes. There was tears, emotions. Honie told his family to keep their heads up, even cracked some jokes, then said his final goodbyes at 8:40 tonight. And we've been told he's been gracious this evening, but you could tell here in this room that the Department of Corrections, the area, you could feel the gravity of this situation. You know, if you remember the 8th Amendment, everyone is entitled to be safe from cruel and unusual punishment. So this is a position of power, and this is a position where journalists are asked to witness as a form of checks and balances for the people. And that's why we will be hearing from these journalists as witnesses after all of this. So it's a very serious situation. Back to you guys.
All right, Amanda, thank you very much. And, you know, initially there were concerns over the 3-drug cocktail that the Department of Corrections had potentially planned to use for Honie's execution. Those drugs were ketamine, fentanyl, and potassium chloride, something you alluded to just moments ago.
That's right. When we were talking earlier about this today, the state ordered that because they felt like it was going to be the quickest and best way that would not cause pain. They figured it was the best option. It was something that hasn't been used in the state before. And because of that, the attorneys said that this was a reason to maybe stop the execution altogether. They were the center of a hearing held earlier in July involving Honie's attorneys and also attorneys for the State Department of Corrections. Chief investigative reporter Wendy Halloran was at that hearing and filed this report about what played out.
Ketamine, a powerful sedative to induce unconsciousness, fentanyl, and potassium chloride to stop Taberon Honie's heart is the drug cocktail the state of Utah procured for the August 8th execution.
Well, there's no question this is an unproven, untested combination of drugs that will be used in this protocol. So that by itself raises some real concerns.
2 News Investigates found ketamine has never been used in an execution in the United States. Nevada authorized its use but never went forward with it. Honie's legal team has concerns that ketamine could cause him to hallucinate.
That's one of the well-known side effects of ketamine, is that it could induce or can induce psychosis, hallucinations, delusions, and that could render him into a state of incompetence to be executed.
Robin Marr is the executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, D.C.
The Supreme Court has asked us to ensure that anyone who is going to be executed understand the reasons they are going to be executed. And that won't be true if Mr. Honie is hallucinating and in a state of psychosis at the time of his execution.
Honie's attorneys argue whether ketamine and fentanyl will be enough to anesthetize him before the potassium chloride is injected, and that he could suffer a horrific death.
And that'll feel like his heart is on fire. It's a very, very distressing and painful way to be killed. And in fact, the United States Supreme Court has said that if anyone is not sufficiently unconscious, using that 3rd drug on them would be a cruel and unusual way to be executed.
In a statement, the Utah Department of Corrections says we stand by the 3-drug combination as an effective and humane method. However, the defense has proposed pentobarbital as an acceptable alternative, and we have been looking into the feasibility of obtaining it.
Well, pentobarbital is what they decided to move forward with. Again, as I mentioned just moments ago, they did share with us that they had 3 doses of that in their readiness for what could take place tonight. They've been walking through and doing run-throughs of this scenario. We were told about 7 that they've actually worked through, the latest as of 7 o'clock tonight, they meaning members of the Department of Corrections. And they mentioned to us they have somebody of a similar sort of stature as Taberon Honie, who they used throughout this process as somebody to physically go through the steps here. But again, we will have to see how that drug takes as it pertains to if everything works out to their plan for the execution tonight.
As questions have popped up throughout the day, we've been able to ask some of those questions. The last execution here in the state was the firing squad, and anyone who was sentenced to death before 2004 has that option of using the firing squad. Oftentimes we hear that the prisoner chooses that because they feel like it's a way to embarrass the state.
I believe there's just one left.
Yeah, there is just one left. But one of the interesting things about it is I was reading up from the U.S. Supreme Court a few years ago when they were looking at this, when there was problems getting some of these drug cocktails, they were getting more expensive. And there were arguments there at the Supreme Court that while it seemed barbaric, that it actually is one of the things that's probably the quickest and causes the least amount of pain for that prisoner. When we talk about that, if you remember from 10 years ago, usually they have 4 people in there who fire those shots. One of them has a blank so that years later they'll never know if they were the one who fired the shot or not. We asked if in the execution chamber the same thing would happen with whoever was pushing that IV in. They said no. In this case, there's one person who's the executioner. They push the IV. They know they're doing it.
Let's head back inside to our 2 News studio, downtown Salt Lake City. Lincoln Graves and Jamie McGriff, joined by defense attorney Sky Lazaro and former Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff. Guys, take it away from here. We are in that window right now of where things are potentially falling into play with the execution process.
Yeah, thank you, Brian and Heidi. I want to start with Mark. Mark, you said earlier there's a lot of attention being focused on Taberon Honie tonight, but you said earlier we don't want to forget about the victim in this case either. No one's really talking about her necessarily right now.
That's right, and I get it. This is the most extreme thing a state can do is taking a life, but the families and the victims are the one we got to think about. I spent some time with Matt Hunsaker. Ralph Menzies killed his mother 30-something years ago now. It's his whole adult life has been this, and he just said, this has got to end, and you don't talk to us enough about this. The families aren't heard. Now, some prefer not to be heard, but you always should remember the life of an amazing Paiute woman leader who he murdered. She was a pillar in her community, and you got to mention that. And remember her as well.
As far as the process, the legal process, there are so many people who are on both sides of this issue about whether or not the state should have done this or whether or not the state should have, just find an alternative. Do you think that this could actually push a solution down the road to actually be a reality, or is this something that you think is here to stay?
I think this is an argument we've been having about the death penalty since we started using the death penalty, and then the new Supreme Court ruling that came out when execution started. These arguments are had and appeals are made and are pushed every time someone's sentenced to death, essentially, is when it starts. And then the defense attorneys don't quit until the person's literally dead. I mean, we see petitions sometimes, to the Supreme Court, while the person is strapped to a bed, and last minute appeals because of a process problem or a drug problem or something that the defense has learned that they didn't know before. So I don't necessarily see this one execution changing a lot of things. I think these are the arguments we've been having on both sides of the aisle since they started using it, and some states, have abolished the death penalty and said we're not going to do it. Utah's not one of them.
We're not going to do that, but I don't know why we can't fix this 25, 30-year timeline. They do it in other states, and you can do it in a way that still protects their rights. Texas does it in 18 months. The average is 18 years nationwide. Texas has executed 855 people since 1982. Now they have a lot more people there, but Oklahoma, which is about the size of Utah, has executed 125 because they get the process going and they have certain requirements to make sure that you have timelines on your appeals and on your habeas corpus petitions, your state and federal. They push them together, and it works in those states.
Versus having 20 years.
20, 30 years, you file
Yes,
one
yeah.
appeal and then you lose, and so you file another appeal. You have to, in those states, you have to file them all at one time, and you go through the state process, then you go to the federal process, and there's timelines. It's not voluntary, or it's not the decision of the convicted. It's actually mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
You have to file within a certain amount of time. They could do that here.
I think we need to take into consideration, though, there's cases out there, and Mark brought this up earlier, we were talking about it. Most of the cases where factual innocence has been proven, or people have been exonerated by, Innocence Project type corporate organizations, have been death penalty cases. So yes, I think it's a huge problem that we wait so long to execute people. But shortening the process, when I look at these Innocence Project cases or Innocence Center cases, these people have been in prison for 25 and 30 years because, science has come so far, forensics have changed, new evidence comes to light, all of these things that weren't known at the time, or evidence was withheld, whatever it is. If we're going to shorten the process to 18 months, the likelihood.
Sorry, I meant 18 years.
Oh, okay. I was like, we're going to end up executing a lot of people that maybe we shouldn't.
So would you say that the appropriate time frame, 10 years?
I think it's never.
One argument I've heard is that if you're going to have the death penalty, it's reserved for those where there is no question of innocence. Whether it's captured on video or for some other circumstances, they know that this person committed the crime. Would you support something like that?
I don't know what that looks like, right? Yeah. Because, for those of us who kind of live in the trenches of this, and Mark was a prosecutor and now works as a defense attorney as well, things look really black and white from the outside. You hear about a case on the news and people are instantly like, oh, they're guilty, or oh, they're innocent, or whatever it is. When you start diving into those cases and you start getting into the evidence and you start analyzing forensics and what really happened and what the state can actually prove, the idea of what is an absolute factual innocence versus an absolute this person did it, I don't know that, aside from the one where there's all these witnesses and it's caught on videotape,
well, we've got a case,
right?
Troy Kell.
But aside from those,
is 27 years on death row. I was representing the Department of Corrections when he murdered Lonnie Blackman because he was a white supremacist and he killed an African American man, and it was all caught on the cameras of the prison, stabbing him. I had to watch that, and it still sticks with me 30-something times, and that there's no question there. He initially said, I'll take a bullet for my white race. I'm not going to appeal. Okay. And then he chickened out and wanted to appeal. And I so wanted as Attorney General to go down there and look him in the face and say, what about taking one for your race? I can't say the word I would use here, but that's still 27 years, and the evidence is absolutely clear. Okay. And it's probably another 5 before they execute Troy.
Mark, Sky, I know we're going to visit with you more throughout tonight as we wait to see what's happened. For now, we're going to go back out to Heidi and Brian.
All right, Lincoln, thank you. As we're talking about the Innocence Project, we do want to make it clear in this case that Taberon Honie has owned up to his crime. There were multiple witnesses to this, young children who witnessed the crime, another child who was one of his victims of a sexual assault. In this case, he's been clear that he did do this and has apologized for the crime. So in this case, he says he did do this.
From what appears to be a little bit more clear-cut compared to other cases, right, when you compared those two. And again, horrific and egregious crimes that happened back in the late 90s for Claudia Benn, and of course the family of her that has had to deal with this over the last 2.5 decades. Let's head back out live to Mark Colbell. He's a short distance from the Utah State Correctional Facility over towards the freeway. Mark, you're in the free speech zone, and now the execution has obviously, as we understand it, in the timeline started to be carried out. So what is taking place now?
Yeah, guys, everybody was, I'm going to step out of the way. Everybody here in this group here started to look at their phones at right around 12:01 during our last live hit. and then they continued to watch their phones, and it became clear to all of them that if everything's on schedule, the execution has started. A lot of these people knelt down in prayer. It was very silent. It was a very somber moment. And then now they're waiting for the official word from the Department of Corrections that the execution has been carried out. Now, one thing they did talk about here, guys, there's several groups here with different acronyms, different names, all of them against the death penalty. But it was interesting. They said his death tonight is not a loss for our cause and what we're trying to do, which is to eradicate the death penalty from every state in the country. They said they've handed out T-shirts, they've handed out buttons. They've handed out things that people, flyers, and they said, don't stop after tonight. Even because of Taberon Honie's death, they said, don't stop after tonight. They said, go out in the community. When you go to the dentist, when you go to the grocery store, wear the T-shirt. Talk to people about why you feel the way you do. Give them buttons. So they said that don't look at this as a loss tonight for the cause that we're trying to project. They said, just make sure that we engage with other people and talk to them about how we feel and why we feel it. And that's what they're doing here right now. They're continuing to speak and talk, and they say that they're going to stay here until they get the official word about Taberon Honie's death. I don't know if that's come down because I've been out here live and I haven't had a chance to check my phone, but I know that Brian and Heidi, I know you guys will, as soon as that comes down, that you'll have the official word. But these people, like I said, knelt in prayer and were very quiet between 12:01 and about 12:10. So back to you guys. It was a very quiet and somber moment out here.
Well, Mark, nothing official has come down as of yet. We are just in that window where it has now been 20 minutes since that execution, if it was on time, may have been carried out. You know, just to point this out, as a media witness, Jim Spiewak was not allowed to take his phone in there with him, was not allowed to have any means of communication. So we will be learning from the folks here at UDC and also in partnership with the Attorney General's office to learn more about when the sentence is carried out.
And we were told that it was expected to start at 12:01. It would likely take about 20 minutes, and then there would be a couple checks. The information would have to get relayed to the building that we're at right now. We do want to go inside to where Amanda Gilbert is. She is in the room where they'll be making that announcement as soon as that information comes down. We're watching and waiting to get that word right now. Mark Cobell out there live with people who are against the death penalty. But Amanda, we've been talking earlier that there are family members who have been waiting for this day, hoping for this day, and will be glad to see the end of a life here.
Yes, and right now we're still just waiting in this room. This is where we've been getting the hourly updates. It's about just a dozen media here sitting and waiting. One thing I want to bring up, what's been going on with the correctional facility. The prison did go on lockdown around 7 this morning, and it will stay on lockdown till tomorrow morning, likely around 6 hours after the execution, is if everything goes as planned. And I know today does impact other inmates. Some regularly scheduled programming has been stopped today. Glenn Mills, the Director of Communications with the Department of Corrections, told me that the mood this week here at the correctional facility has just been somber and serious. A lot of people know what is going on tonight. So again, we are waiting. Behind me is where we will know, we will get the announcement of when the sentence has been carried out. Back to you guys.
4, 5, 6.
Amanda, thank you very much. Again, we are awaiting the official word for what took place here. Before we get there, though, let's take a look back, almost spanning now a few decades.
That's right. Looking back to the 90s, anyone who lived in Cedar City at the time knows that this was a brutal crime. It certainly rocked the area there in Cedar City. A lot of families who knew these two different families, and it was a very difficult time. We want to listen into a little bit of what played out in this case back in 1998.
This gentleman breaks into this lady's home. He knows her. He beats her, brutally beats her, bites her. Then he slits her throat 4 times with a 13-inch knife. Then he uses that knife to sexually mutilate her. And this is a sentence defendant has earned. If there was ever a capital case in this state, this is it.
Taberon Honie was convicted last year of murdering 49-year-old Claudia Benn. The victim was Honie's former girlfriend's mother. He was arrested at Benn's home moments after the murder.
It was a violent crime, as are most murders. But when you decide to take somebody's life as a penalty, then you have to make sure you're doing it on a proper basis.
In the Utah Supreme Court today, Honie's attorney Steve McCoy argued the death penalty was out of line. He said that Honie, who was only 22 years old at the time of the murder, was a young, impoverished person raised on the Navajo Indian reservation and had no criminal history.
When you impose a death penalty, then the death penalty has to be imposed fairly, and to do that you have to compare it with the rest of the cases in the state where the death penalty has been imposed. And we feel that when you do that, you'll find out that this was a case that does not call for the death penalty.
That from former reporter Michael Rawson, putting that piece together back in September of 2001, at one point when Honie was trying to appeal his death sentence. Again, that was 23 years ago at this point.
And those appeals ending yesterday for their final time. We want to go back to the studio right now as we're keeping an eye and waiting for the final word from the state that that execution was successful and over.
Thank you, Brian and Heidi. Mark Shurtleff, former Attorney General, Sky Lazaro, defense attorney, joining us. Mark, you were talking about other states earlier and how they do execute more people. Certainly that's a matter of population. Is it also a matter that they're simply carrying this out more than Utah?
Yes,
pursued more?
If you look at Oklahoma, which is the second highest, they've executed 125, and they're about the size of the state of Utah. Both those states have a system where, first of all, it's an automatic appeal. You go to the trial court, go to the criminal court of appeals, and then to the United States Supreme Court on the state appeal. Interesting. Then you move to the habeas corpus, which is a different thing. Again, you go state habeas corpus, and it ends up at the United States Supreme Court. Third, you go to the federal district court, federal court of appeals, and Supreme Court. So in that case, the Supreme Court has already seen it by the time they get the last one. You have very strict rules on how quick you can do it. Here you see some of these cases, well, they'll file an appeal and 10 years later it's ruled on, and then they'll file another appeal about something else in the case. In Texas, Oklahoma, and some of these places, you have to file everything in that first appeal. And so it's still, on average, 12 to 18 years in those states. Plenty of time, I believe, to be able to have it heard and have all the rights protected. And I think you would argue, well, that what if the DNA comes back on year 19, right? So I get that as well, but 30 years, 35 years.
That's a lifetime, you would say.
It is, and the conditions aren't good. I mean, most states, you're 23 hours a day lockdown. You get 1 hour a day out if you're on death row. It's a horrific life. Justice Breyer, in a Supreme Court case in a dissent, said that alone should be cruel and unusual. The long delays themselves. And he says, I get it. We have to give them all those rights because of the 8th Amendment, but we can do it different, and if we don't, you ought to do away with it.
A question, one of you can answer, both can answer this one, if you are able to. We have heard that there are a number of people that are allowed to witness the execution, a certain number of people for the victims as well as for the person being executed. Would you know if there is a legal reason why those numbers are the way that they are?
I don't know the answer to that.
For us, it was simply a matter of space. It was the firing squad, and it was a little bit different setup. But the viewing place is very limited. So for that reason, it was kind of a small thing, and they wanted both sides, if they wanted to be there. And I had my chief deputy, Kirk Torgensen, down there because I was in my office at the Capitol waiting to give the order to go ahead. So I think that's the reason, other than I don't know that it's just a matter of space.
All right, we did just get a 3-minute warning, we're told. We are going to head back out to Heidi and Brian that we may be getting word here on this execution, guys.
All right, thank you. We have received a warning that there will be a news conference update in 3 minutes, and from what we understand from the conversations we've had throughout the day, that means that we do believe that the execution was successful and Taberon Honie is dead.
We would assume that based on the conversations we had, asking about a contingency plan for the what-if scenario if something were to have gone wrong, and then they would have come up with said plan and then shared those things with us. So we're expecting to hear in the next couple of minutes perhaps the official word that the sentence has been carried out. And for that, we will hear from the folks at the Utah Department of Corrections as we learn further. That is all they will say, we were told. in that time frame, and then they will go into great detail in roughly, I'd imagine, about an hour or so once all of the witnesses have come back, including members of the Corrections Department staff as well.
That's right. And there are separate rooms for those witnesses. There are 7 media witnesses from the different local media outlets, from TV stations, newspapers that will be watching. There's also a room with 4 family members of Taberon Honie, and then more family members from Claudia Benn, who was murdered in this case, who wanted to be here to see the end of this case that has been so wrought for their family for so many years.
If we could pull up the shot of the podium area, by the way, so we can catch the very beginning of this. It should be a rather quick announcement if we could get a good look at what is taking place in there right now. They are getting taken care of. That is Karen Tepany from the Utah Department of Corrections, likely making sure that microphones are all set. Glenn Mills with Department of Corrections has been the one to address the media over the last 5 hours or so, but she is speaking here. Let's listen in.
For Taberon Dave Honie has been carried out. We will provide you with additional details at our press conference when the media witnesses return to this building, which should be in about an hour. Thank you.
So you hear there live on 2 News. So you hear there live on 2 News at 12:30 on the dot here on this Thursday morning that the sentence for Taberon Honie has been carried out, meaning he has been executed by lethal injection.
We'll get a lot more information in about an hour from now. The media witnesses will come in for a news conference. First, we'll hear from the Department of Corrections. They'll give us some of the basic facts, if he had any final words, if anything went wrong. Then we'll be hearing from those witnesses. Jim Spiewak from KUTV 2 News and the others will sit at a table. They will answer questions. They are not reporters tonight. They are witnesses to this execution. They will tell us what they saw, anything that they noticed as this was happening. We'll be talking to them about that because there's no way for them to record this. That's why they come back and answer all of our questions.
I'm not sure if we had the opportunity to go back out to Mark Colbell. Those are folks that were obviously overwhelmingly opposed to the death penalty, and I imagine they have likely just heard the word because it has been streaming not only on our platform but all over at this point and is likely taken to social media. If we have Mark Colbell, let's head out there live and get a look at what is taking place in the free speech zone. Mark, if you can hear us, how would you describe the situation right now? Has that word of Taberon Honie's execution actually been passed along? Are folks familiar with that?
Yeah, these people all have their cell phones out, and of course they've been listening in to try to find out when the exact announcement was going to come down. You can see that they're still here holding their signs. They pretty much knew just about maybe 10 minutes after 12 that this was probably being carried out, and they would probably get word soon. Not a lot of reaction out here. A lot of just somberness and quiet. Nobody talking right now, nobody speaking. People on their phones, obviously, trying to get the official information. Yeah, they've been here all day. They started setting up around 5 o'clock this afternoon. They closed down this road at 4:25, and they've just been waiting. They've been waiting, and they've been talking, and they've been having speeches. They've knelt down in prayer. They sang Amazing Grace, and they're all a little somber and sad right now. They really we're trying to hope that this wouldn't happen and that maybe there'd be some kind of a way that Taberon Honie would not be put to death here, but some of them have traveled from across the country to be here, and they do this for almost every execution. This particular group, there's about 4 groups here that I counted, different groups with different names, and they travel around the country, and their sole focus is to try to eradicate the death penalty from across the United States, from every state in the country. 12 states right now do not have a death penalty, and they would like to make that. They'd like to make that go all the way across the United States. So, yeah, they're very sad. A lot of them sat down when they got the news. Some of them, they just sang a song a few minutes ago together. They took part in singing several songs, and they also had a religious service here with a lot of different religions that were represented here. It was a service that had pastors, had priests, and they did a lot of different prayers from a lot of different religions, and they sought comfort with each other. And now they're seeking that comfort as they stand here, and the news has filtered through, according to the people that are here. Let's go over, guys. If you don't mind, we're going to walk over.
The execution has been confirmed, and the world is no safer. Utah is no safer. Another victim family has been created, and a victim family is soon to learn that another killing didn't change anything for them. There will always be that empty chair at the table when the family gathers, and no amount of killing will bring back our loved ones. So the question for us is, where do we go from here? It really doesn't matter what promises you make. What matters is what promises you keep. And so tonight, I want to invite everybody to make a promise to yourself as to what you're going to do to work to an end to state-sponsored violence like executions and all the other flavors of violence that make us lesser as a people. The hope I have is from the number of people that are here and the fact that for each person that is here, there are many, many, many more who would be if they could, if they knew about it, if they had the wherewithal, if somebody had helped them, if somebody had talked to them. And together, as we bring our message that we didn't need this execution in order to hold Taberon Honie accountable or to be saved from him if he was still a future danger, which he was not. We did not need this.
We're gonna break. Abraham, he is with Stop Execution Now, his group, and he made the official announcement here that indeed the execution of Taberon Honie did happen, and it had occurred, and now he's just speaking to the people that are here before they wrap up this demonstration here outside the prison. It was interesting, guys. Earlier today, some of the national media sent still photographers out, and they said, we don't really have anything to shoot. We can't get close enough to the prison. They were talking about how difficult this was of an area for this protest today to get to and to set up and to try to get close enough to the prison. They still feel like their voices weren't heard there, but they feel like their voices were heard here with the media presence that came out for these protests today. Guys, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, Mark, thank you. We are live outside of the State Correctional Facility. If they were outside the prison, I don't know that any voices inside would be hearing them. This prison has been on lockdown since early this morning. The road coming off of I-80 to the prison, which is about 8,000 west, shut down for hours. The only people allowed out here were the witnesses, the attorneys, and then the media who were credentialed to be here. Also tonight, we've been watching drones overhead, part of the security that's happening here tonight.
Yes, and they've been obviously doing perimeter surveillance. You mentioned that road. It was closed off about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and we had to show credentials to get in here. It's been extremely quiet out here because of the obvious. The prison being on lockdown, there's no activity, there's no one moving about, other than really everything set in place here to make sure all of those run-throughs were carried out for the actual execution in itself, based on all those run-throughs that they took place. So it's been very quiet. Nothing has changed in that standpoint over the last 5-6 hours at this point. But thank you for watching our special report here tonight. We brought you a lot of in-depth coverage this evening from a lot of different perspectives. But again, that execution was carried out, the full sentence for Taberon Honie, with the announcement coming down just a few moments ago, 8 minutes ago, at 12:30 a.m.
We will be back again at 1:30 a.m. That's when we expect to have the witnesses back to where we are. They're on the other end of the campus. They will be briefed. They will be back on a bus, and there will be a news conference. We will be carrying live if you want to hear what the witnesses saw and heard while they were in that execution room.
We'll also have full reports up later today. KUTV 2 News. Heidi Hatch, Brian Schnee outside of the Utah State Correctional Facility. We'll now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.